Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar titled Healthcare Materials Management. Thank you for joining us today. Today's webinar will take roughly 30 minutes followed by a short question and answer period. A few housekeeping notes. To the right is the GoToWebinar control panel where you can raise your hand and ask questions. Please submit questions via the questions panel. Our presenter George will be happy to take all of your questions at the end of the webinar. At this time, I would like to introduce George Tonzatich. George has a background in accounting, has held the position of controller for a number of large enterprises, and has sold high-end business-to-business solutions for organizations such as Maximizer, Computer Associates, and Deloitte & Touche. In his role as VP of Sales for Binary Stream, George is instrumental in business planning for Binary Stream's large-scale solution project developments and is also responsible for the continued growth and development of Binary Stream sales in both fostering new partner relationships and supporting existing customers. I'll turn it over to you now, George.
Thank you, Deidre. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is George Tonzatich. Today we're going to be talking about supply chain in healthcare and how it relates to Dynamics Great Plains. We're going to see some of the how Dynamics Great Plains, when combined with Binary Stream's healthcare materials management, can help you control inventory, streamline those workflows within a Great Plains Dynamics environment. So today I'm going to is really going to be more of a PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to speak for about a half an hour to different very, very high-end concepts, and then we're going to leave the last 15 minutes open for Q&A. No further ado, I guess we'll get started here. We're going to talk a little bit about consumption-based supply chain today, what that really means in healthcare. A lot of people ask, when do I really need a materials management healthcare system? We're going to address those points. We're going to look at some of the contemporary issues in materials management systems as it relates to healthcare. Then we're going to talk about some of the key solution concepts that we provide, and then we're going to get to some Q&A. So here we go. So let's talk about consumption-based supply chain. Now, for those of you that know Great Plains out of the box is really a distribution-based supply chain model. So in other words, it's based on the idea that when goods are sold, things come out of inventory, cost of goods sold are established. That's really the basis of what Great Plains does out of the box. But consumption-based supply chain in healthcare is something quite different. Inventory is not sold, it is consumed. And if you think about it, it makes sense. Patients come into hospital, they need supplies such as bandages, syringes. Those items are consumed. And the customers are within the organization. So at a very high level, that they're the actual departments like the nursing stations that require the materials. And then eventually those materials are used for patient care. Now, in Great Plains, items that exist can have positive and negative stock balances. Well, in healthcare, there are items such as that are called stock and non-stock items. We're going to explain this in far more detail. Stock items have positive stock balances, non-stock do not. And lastly, inventory control and consumption-based supply chain is not controlled in the method of maximum, minimums, averages, means, and such. They're controlled more through arbitrary levels that are set called PAR levels. Again, we'll explain that in more detail as we go through our presentation today. So, when do healthcare organizations typically need a materials management system? Well, if we look at it from an investment point of view, obviously if I have a lot of inventory investment, if I have a lot of goods being consumed through the system, yes, I probably need a system to control that. The second area would be is if I have centralized purchasing or very, very sophisticated materials consumption workflows. So in other words, if I have a centralized purchasing department, if I have a central stores, if I receive everything through the central stores, and very importantly, if those goods move from central stores out to the different consumption areas, whether it be a nursing station, OR, the emergency room, wherever. Goods move from central stores out to the consumption areas. The other thing is, are there issues in the control of inventory? So is there, do we have issues around maybe items being expensed when they should be billed? Do we have items where there's shrinkage and we don't know where that shrinkage is occurring? Again, that's another reason why we would need a system. Also in hospitals, the reporting of inventory accuracy and the consumption statistics tend to be weaker. And they tend to be weaker, again, because in central stores, the goods and flow of goods are very, very well monitored. When we get to the consumption sites, as you'll find out, that's where the control gets weaker, because healthcare practitioners look after customer care first, and usually inventory control and accuracy isn't high on their list. And the last thing is where you really need to ensure that billable patient materials are sent to the billing system and then billed to a patient. This is a very, very big contemporary issue now in healthcare, and it's something where hospitals spend, and whether it be hospitals, clinics, assisted living, hospices, spend a lot of time and effort now ensuring that those items do make it to the billing system and are then billed to the patient. So what are some of the contemporary issues that are going on with materials management systems in healthcare? Well, as always, for people that have been in healthcare for a while, you'll know that there are many, many disparate systems within a hospital. There are clinical systems, there are OR systems, there are pharmacy systems, lab systems. There's the ERP piece that we know, the billing system. These are all very different and sophisticated systems. And connecting those systems is something that is always an issue within healthcare. Larger vendors such as McKesson and Cerner have very large systems that are all interconnected, but these systems are extremely expensive and always not best of breed in any one particular area. Now, the second issue that we've already touched on is this idea of inventory control at the consumption site level. This has always been a huge issue in healthcare. So the issue being that once those goods leave central stores and make it out to the consumption site, the control of those items in a perpetual inventory sense is extremely hard to manage. And if you think about it, you know, a nurse has a problem with a patient, they get a syringe or materials, they use it. Those things are not always accounted for properly. So the book inventory balances can be off from what the actual amount of inventory on hand is. And the next thing is always around all hospital systems is what's the scalability and affordability of your material system? Gets back to that first point we saw on the last slide. Is there enough size? Is the scalability of the system going to be enough for what's going on now with materials and the investments there versus what's going to happen in the next 5 years? And what is the optimum level of materials that you want to have in your organization? That is a difficult question, because that question can be based on patient capacity, what you anticipate your future needs are going to be, what level of care you're going to want to have within your organization. So, for instance, and we'll talk about this more when we come to PAR levels, is the idea is if our capacity is going to suddenly increase by 30 or 40% in the next 6 months, will the level of materials that we have to have on hand change as well? And lastly, we have different interface needs as well for systems. So again, we might be on a desktop computer or a laptop where we can use the full or the fat client, or maybe we're out there remotely right now and we want to access things over the internet. So a .NET interface. The other thing too now, which is very popular in healthcare, is the idea of portable handhelds. So whether it be handhelds for materials, taking them out, taking them in, or whether we're doing patient billing from a handheld, the handhelds now have come to be a very extremely important part of healthcare systems. Okay, so now we're going to start to talk about how Great Plains works and how our solution works with Great Plains to provide a materials management solution. So as you can see on the bottom in green, we have all the base Great Plains modules, or what we would call the ERP backbone. So notice you'll see the financials, which would be the general ledger, accounts payable, possibly accounts receivable, depending on the billing system used, fixed assets, but most importantly, notice the inventory and purchase order processing pieces. These are the primary pieces that Binary Stream builds its application over and changes those two modules from distribution-based supply chain to consumption-based supply chain. And that's a very important thing to note, is that we use that existing Great Plains functionality, which is tried, true, and tested for the last 20 or 30 years, and we build on top of it. We don't rebuild, or we don't try to rebuild the world here, okay? Now, you can see that at the top, we handle areas such as overall procurement, the fulfillment of goods, the consumption of those goods, and the reporting of those goods. Now, one thing we've left off here in this list was the idea of how we requisition those goods. Now, requisitioning is an area that is very, very well managed within the Great Plains world. In fact, there were 3 or 4 very, very strong vendors, such as RecLogic, such as Paramount Workplace, and the Ariat product, which have very, very strong requisition products. Because this solution is a best-of-breed solution in the Great Plains world, we decided not to build a requisition product per se, and so what we do is we offer integration to all 3 of those best-of-breed products. So again, when you look at Great Plains as a platform, we transform it and we give you a best-of-breed solution for healthcare materials management. Before we get on to some of the specific items in Great Plains and Binary Stream, I want to talk a little bit about some of the different transaction types that you see in material movements in healthcare. The first thing are inventory transfers. Well, that's pretty much the same as standard Great Plains. In other words, when goods move from one location to another or inventory location from another, we move the inventory units and the dollars from one site to another, okay? So on the GL, it might move from central stores out to consumption site 10, okay? Now, an issue transaction is something very, very specific to consumption-based supply chain. And that's the idea that goods will physically move from one inventory site to another. The difference now is that when we say move goods from central stores to a consumption site, it moves the goods from central stores in terms of both the units and the dollar amounts, but it expenses it immediately to the destination inventory site. So why do we do that? Well, we do that primarily because in healthcare, by the time those goods get to the consumption site, we don't have very good inventory control. So again, based on the gap conservatism principle, the idea being that as soon as we move the goods, we want to expense them. Now, there are tools out there now, point-of-use tools, that are starting to break this model, because this model is really, you probably find at about 80 to 90% of all healthcare systems, people use issue transactions. But as you're now starting to see in healthcare, you're now starting to see the idea of point-of-use devices allow you to transfer inventory to the site, and then as the goods are physically consumed one by one, whatever the unit of measure is, they're then expensed at that point. Those systems are now becoming far more popular. So now let's talk about some of the items where Binary Stream and Great Plains work together to provide a consumption-based supply solution. So if you look at the following screen for item maintenance, you're going to see the concept. Well, if you look at the screen, this is the Binary Stream item maintenance screen. It looks a lot like the Great Plains screen, except for the areas in red where we've made some modifications. So again, you'll notice the idea of many different descriptions for a good, whether it be a generic description, maybe a short description, the actual user description, what have you. We have a lot of ways to actually describe a product. Also notice all the different units of measures that we need. So look at that for obviously when things come into purchasing, they come in bulk. So that's usually the largest unit of measure, or the purchasing unit of measure. In this case, which would be a case of 4 boxes of 50 each. Now the issue unit of measure is when goods leave central stores and move to that consumption site. So in this case, it's each. Might have actually been a box of 50, but in this case it was marked as each. And then when it's actually being consumed by the patient, what is the lowest, or the actual patient charge unit of measure, which is also each. And of course below that, all the corresponding costs that are associated with those different units of measure. Vendor information, pretty much the same as standard Great Plains. Notice if you look at our vendor contract, discount, and rebates module, we can have contracts against those particular items as well. So as you can see, I do have a contract here that basically comes up in the year 2017. Up in the right-hand corner, you see a number of checkboxes. Those are label attributes that we use for labels, and they can be changed by users at any time. And these are totally free flow. They basically are just almost like a yes/no type of on-off type of switch. Notice that now we're going to be talking about stock and non-stock items. And this is the big difference between item control in distribution-based versus consumption-based supply chain. A stock item is an item that can have a positive inventory balance, and an item we're usually going to keep in stock. A non-stock item, however, is an item that, while it has an item number in the system and descriptions, it's an item that we will never have a positive inventory balance of. In other words, it will always be zero. And the reason for that being is that as soon as those goods are received, they're automatically expensed to the destination department. So what does a non-stock item look like? Well, it probably looks like an item that's maybe something that's very expensive. It might be an item that expires quickly. Maybe it's an item that the supplier is right next door to us, and we don't ever have to worry about ever having enough any type of lead time to make out-of-stock conditions ever happen. Whatever the case, those are the reasons why many healthcare organizations have stock versus non-stock items. And lastly, as you can see here, you're going to look at patient charge code information. So we've talked about that principle that for many healthcare organizations, the recovery of materials that were used and to be billed is very important. So as you can see, we have base schedules here that allow us to take an item, mark it up, and then have basically a standard charge out rate for those items. So where this item might cost us, I don't know, $4.19 each, you can see the charge amount is $4.48. Well, that's probably a pretty low number. Markups in healthcare are a lot higher, but you can see the idea is that you're going to take the cost and mark it up to some type of billable patient amount. Okay, inventory sites. Inventory sites in Great Plains work exactly the same in distribution-based as they would in consumption-based, except we've added some different features and functionality to it. An inventory site can be as small as the smallest nursing cart with a few instruments and bandages and syringes on it, right up to central stores. When it comes to inventory sites, the size of the inventory site does not matter. Okay, they're all inventory sites. Now you notice here that we've got some interesting, up at the top we have all sorts of different labeling attributes now that you can do within the product that don't exist in standard Great Plains. Labeling in healthcare is an extremely important materials function that must always happen either at the item level, shelf levels, wall labels and the wall levels. All of those different types of labeling must occur. But notice some of the different switches that we can apply to a particular inventory site. So a site can be a par site. So in other words, the items within that site are controlled by individual or arbitrary par levels. Okay? Maybe the site is a requisition site. So in other words, it's a site maybe that can requisition directly from a supplier and doesn't have to go through central stores. Maybe it's a replenishment site that can replenish other sites. So in other words, it's almost like a mini central stores. It's big enough that where it not only consumes goods, but can ship goods off to another one. And then, of course, we point to the main site where it gets replenished from. As items can be stock and non-stock, so can sites. Okay? So in other words, central stores is obviously a stock site. It carries items, it carries positive inventory balances, and then sends goods out to different stock or non-stock sites. A non-stock site is a site exactly that, is that it will never ever have a positive inventory balance. In other words, any goods that are sent to it are automatically expensed. So regardless of what happens at the item level, as soon as you send it to this site, the goods are expensed regardless. So we talk about the idea of par level. Now, par level does not exist in standard Great Plains. Binary Stream had to add this. So again, it's the idea that a separate item has an arbitrary level. Okay? Nothing to do with maximums, nothing to do with minimums. It has an arbitrary level. Well, why does it have an arbitrary level? Well, it's because regardless of supply and demand, hospitals want to keep a certain level there because patient care isn't something where as in the distribution world, you can be out of stock for a while. If someone needs something and it's a life and death situation, those goods have to be available for use. So you'll notice in these, with the that I have a list of about, I don't know, a dozen items here. Most of them are stock items. You'll notice that there's one non-stock item. Okay, so again, this is a site that's a stock site, but at the same time, it has one item that, regardless of whether it has a lot of things, this one item, whenever it comes in, we want to expense it immediately. Okay, item usage. In healthcare, whether it be at the materials management stage or at the consumption site stage, managers want to forecast what their item usage is. Now, in distribution-based supply chain, it's pretty easy. You just call up sales reports. You see what was sold in terms of dollars. You see what was sold in terms of units. But in consumption-based supply chain, it's different because it's being consumed. So Binary Stream has actually gone and developed a query screen, as you can see, that basically allows you to track item usage by date, by individual sites or ranges of site inventory sites, by item class. So if you class your items in certain areas like maybe syringes or bandages, you can look at all of those, and by item number and item number ranges as well. This is a very, very important tool for almost every materials manager within healthcare. You've got to know when and where those materials are moving. And lastly, as in almost all binary analysis screens, you'll see that you can export this material to this report to Excel for further analysis. Okay. Integration to different systems, and particularly billing systems, as we've talked about before, is extremely important within materials management. Now, Binary Stream offers two ways to integrate to a billing system, and I'm going to say billing for now, but I'm going to talk about how it integrates to other systems as well. Obviously, there's basically two ways and two systems. So the billing system can initiate the actual materials. So in other words, if the billing system receives information that goods have been consumed, it can send those issue or decrement records down to the binary system to be depleted, or materials management can initiate it and say, this has been used, let's send this information up to the billing system. Now, in either of these cases, both of these systems need different bits of information from the other system. So if the billing system is sending down to Binary Stream, well, The billing system's got to know what our item numbers look like, right? And has to know what our decrement transactions look like. On the other hand, when materials management sends up to the billing system, has to know what the patient number is, might have to know, again, the item number and the actual charges and such that are going to be applied. In this case, we're now synchronizing different information from different systems. So binary stream has what we call console functionality, which allows us to create those files in a very quick developed and be able to put information in a certain place, grab that information back from the billing system, or push information to a place where the billing system can grab it. This is very standard functionality now for us. The connectors that we've built through the console relate to certain vendors now that we deal with quite a bit, like, for instance, Cerner, Epic, Allscripts, people like that. And we've just talked about billing systems at this point, but we also touched on the point-of-use machines. Now, point-of-use machines now are actually controlling what units are being taken out at the consumption sites. Well, at the same time then, when those goods are being taken out, we want the same type of integration to come back to materials management. So again, the console functionality we have built for integration to billing can be used for all these point-of-use devices, such as Pyxis and Omnicell, which are two of the more popular point-of-use machines that are out in the world today. Okay, I think we're coming towards the end of our slides for today. You know, one of the other things we talked about very quickly is that out of the box, you know, Great Plains obviously doesn't handle bar coding and handheld functionality. And this media now, or interface, is very popular and very convenient for healthcare people, whether it be in stores or whether it be even nurse practitioner or nurses or, say, practitioners within a healthcare organization to be able to do quick inventory functions. So as you can see, a handheld like this would have a little scanner on the bottom that can read barcodes. And look at what we can do with it. We can requisition inventory very quickly. So in other words, if I'm in, say, a storeroom from a consumption site, maybe once a week I'm going to go in there, scan all my items, and when I do that, it's going to tell me what my par level is. I'm going to put the quantity that's left, and we're going to requisition the difference from central stores. We have different reviews that we can look at for par levels, for item maintenance. Direct charge actually is just another name for inventory transfers, so I can do inventory transfers on this. When we talk about those issue transactions, so if I wanted to actually do more perpetual type inventory control here, I could do actual inventory decrements or issue transactions on a handheld. I can cycle count on a handheld. Isn't that wonderful? This is very important now for contemporary inventory control. Cycle counting at any time. The cycle counting also works with Great Plains, so though that information is sent up to Great Plains and inventory variances are then established. We can fulfill all the supply requisitions. When we requisitioned inventory, we now actually can fulfill those electronically. We don't have to walk around with a piece of paper anymore. And the last thing is we can do receivings. So in other words, when goods come in, we can actually receive on a handheld. Again, avoiding a lot of people going back and forth picking up papers. We can do it electronically right on a handheld. Okay, we've sure moved through that pretty quickly today. We only had a half an hour, and I can see we're bang on schedule. So are there any questions that you have for us today?
I think, George, it sounds as though you've covered everything because there are no questions. Wow.
Boy, that doesn't usually happen. I think it's probably my strong Canadian accent that has fooled everyone.
Well, as with all presentations, George has provided his contact information, so should you have any questions following this webinar, please feel free to forward them to George. Any other closing remarks you'd like to add, George?
You know, I understand that a lot of materials management concepts, and this was a very high level presentation. Sometimes questions come after the fact. Please take a note of my email address. It's pretty simple. It's george@binarystream.com. Please feel free to email me any questions, whether it be if you're an end user or whether you're a reseller, and hopefully I can answer those questions for you.
Okay, and
All
then
right?
I'd like to finish by thanking you for joining us today, and to let you know that you will be receiving an email presentation copy of this presentation shortly, as well as a link to the recorded version of this presentation as well. So thank you again. Hopefully we'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.